Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show, day 209 of the war in Israel. Today, I've got Marco and Richard and Alejandro with me. How's it going, guys?
Very good, thank you.
Lovely. And today, we're talking about the campus protests again. We've had some updates over the last 24 hours. The police have broken up the encampment in UCLA and they've taken some action elsewhere. So, we're just going to be summarizing that for you guys and talking a bit about it, saying what we think. We're also going to talk a bit about the reactions to it and looking at some videos and clips as well. So, Mark and Richard, why don't you guys just update everyone just a bit about what's happened?
Yeah, what we're seeing lately, it's not at all an exercise in free protest, but it's just a plain and simple abuse of private property, and of people's individual right, specifically right of the student to attend class, and even more sinister, the kind of level of violence that Jewish students were targeted and that to put up with. We had a mob gatherings under the guise of a protest. But what we actually witnessed was a series of crimes. Now, how do you deal with them? Well, what to do when violence is used to attack rights of an individual? We've been talking about it for 6 months here. This is just a different concrete, which applies to the same principle. When such a level of attack of individual rights occurs, like the enormity of the violent scale of we've seen in October 7, or of the widespread irrational response that we've seen, all that you can do is get the government to intervene and use its monopoly of violence, of force against and remove the threat. So we've seen the response in Israel. The response in Israel is remove the threat, which is destroy Hamas and wipe it out and make sure Israel is no longer threatened by it. In this case, which we've seen overnight, the police should intervene, and remove the obstacle, remove the protesters, remove the people who are causing the crime, causing the violence, and therefore allow everyone to enjoy the space and enjoy whatever activity they want to do. So stopping people being not allowed to go in certain areas, and all this kind of violence we see in the last week or so.
Yeah. Could you open that one for me, Marco? So I just wanted to give a quick update of some of the things we've seen in different universities overnight. I mean, like Yale University, for example, where the police dispersed about 200 protesters last night. Portland State University, where they closed several blocks around the campus. Stony Brook University, where 29 students, faculty members, and others were arrested. The University of Wisconsin, where the police were called, Madison police were called in to disperse protesters. University of Dallas, Texas, where 17 people were arrested as they removed an encampment, plus the UCLA stuff, which has been all over social media. And I think one of the things that's been noticeable about the past 24 hours, and certainly even the longer period, to be honest, is the necessity to which, in order to get a proper picture of what's been going on, you sort of need to see a little bit of social media as well as mainstream media in order to get a proper representation of it. And of course, in doing so, one of the things you've got to do is evaluate the sources you're being shown, and make sure that you've got an accurate representation of what's really going on, because many of those media clips, particularly on social media, can be super framed, super clipped to imply, for example, that the police are, willy-nilly firing at a crowd, and you don't see the number of times they warn people to move back, to clear the area, and to which they don't comply ahead of that. But if you clip it from the beginning point, then you can frame it as an authoritarian police raid with no warning, and make it look like some regime from abroad. And this is the crucial element of it, is making sure that you understand the essential elements of it, make sure you understand the context of it, and not simply look at it from a perceptual level of, look, this is authority cracking down on the poor people, when it's actually the poor people that Marco was referring to earlier, all of the kids that aren't in the protests, all of those trying to get to class, trying simply to cross campus, trying to graduate, trying to get an education that they've paid for. That's the crucial element to it, and the focus is always on who you can see right now, which is the loud idiot that is causing havoc, vandalism, destruction. So it's good to see that is being pushed back on, because without the pushback, it only leads to more.
Alejandro, any initial thoughts before we go to the video?
Just let me add that one of the key and striking features of the police taking out these protesters so far, and what we can tell from the videos, is that the protesters didn't go lightly and didn't go like saying, okay, I give up, we're going to go. They fought back. And what we have seen so far from this is not only, it may be portrayed as these victims of authoritarianism, cramping authoritarianism, being facing policemen having all the force by their sides, and they being poor little lambs, unable to do anything. So far, reports say that some policemen were hit. One of them injured by skateboards, by that terrible weapon that it's a skateboard, and yeah, it's quite unnerving. And one of the things that we should emphasize is that these protests, as Marcus said, aren't at all peaceful. But more than anything, and if you wanted more proof, is their response to police coming there and what they did against them.
So let's just play the first clip, Daniel. So fairly horrific scenes, really, in the sense that it's quite a lot of chaos and violence. I mean, I take it, I think this video is from UCL when they were breaking up the encampment. And I think it was a UCL which had yes, Daniel's saying it's from UCL. I think it was UCL that had the Israeli kind of counter protesters come and attack the encampment. And what's interesting from the left's response to this, just looking at Twitter, is that the police, so the Israeli protesters go and basically have a fight with these protesters, and then the police delay coming in to stop them in some sense. And this issues a wave of condemnations from the left, who are saying, where were you? Apparently, I think when the police went in just this time, the protesters were shouting, where were you last night? Because they didn't come in to stop the Israel protesters. And Gavin Newsom, I think, also issued a condemnation. Yet they're crickets when it comes to actually breaking up these protests beforehand. And even Owen Jones was saying, look, pro-Israeli thugs going and attacking these students, and then they're saying that it's the left who are harking back to 1930s Europe, unimaginable. So there's just utter hypocrisy. I think these people are very cynical in the sense that they know that, well, what they want is they want to advance these students being able to use these violent means and then get away with it. And then if there's any response to it, to actually protect the rights of the poor students who are being victimized, like Richard was saying, then they suddenly discover, oh, maybe maybe there's something wrong here. And it's just utter rank hypocrisy. But Mark and Richard, what did you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those scenes are just frankly pathetic. If they really hate the police violence, well, all they're shouting at you is get back. All you have to do is get back, and nothing will happen to you. just remove yourself, and the police will leave you alone. No, they decide to fight back, and quite rightly so, they get in the neck. But yeah, mentioning the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. I mean, hypocrisy from him is a brand, really. This is the same guy who was having meal at the French Laundry, a very expensive restaurant during the COVID time, when people in his own state weren't allowed to get out. He was there living it up in a very expensive restaurant. So what do you expect from this guy? And of course, the Muslim leaders cried victim at the same time, because that's what they do. We've seen it in so many occasions now. When the Muslims are involved, all they do, cry victim, and oh my God, Islamophobia, all this kind of stuff. Gaza has made a career out of it. And they're using the same technique that Palestinians are using in the Middle East, have been translated onto the campuses in America and the West. Not only these techniques, but also earlier on we saw before the scaffolds, there was a big call to pray. Lots of Western middle class, probably atheist kids with their ass in the air, praying, Muslim chanting and whatever. And I mean, these are people in California. These are Biden voters. Chances are these are total Democrats. People who care so much about women's rights. People who care so much about LGBT rights. People who care so much about freedom of religion and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm sorry. If you go down the route, you're gonna lose all those freedom, and you're gonna lose even your own freedom. But they don't realize. They just don't think. They just follow jacked up people at the front with the megaphone, calling for the crowd to call back whatever they shout. And it's just frankly pathetic. I mean, all these things in the end we count for nothing, like the Protestant 68 counted for nothing. These in particular are totally unprincipled riots and protests.
And it's a reflection of the state the culture is in at the moment. The culture is in a state where make me a victim and you make me a hero, and that's how things are framed. They want to frame themselves as the oppressed in order to show solidarity with the supposed oppressed in Gaza and with any oppressed person that they choose to list within the same sentence or the same pamphlet. So the frequent references to George Floyd and to I can't breathe and those kind of things, when it's simply an attempt to pretend that you're part of some bigger group that is receiving the hard jackboot of evil government or evil capitalism on your head, and you're fighting against it. Well, none of that is true, and it doesn't convince many people, to be honest, outside of their own little echo chamber and outside of their own festival style encampment. And I'm sure they've got some dramatic stories to tell in terms of when they were pushed back or fell over or whatever, or tripped over a tent pole or any of those kind of things. But none of that really counts for anything. Because the police have done what they're supposed to do, which is clearing trespassers from private property, so that people who legitimately want to go about their law-abiding business can continue to do so. That is not an oppression of free speech.
Alejandro?
I wanted to talk a bit more about the concept that the protesters use regarding violence. And I think it's very telling. The BBC was interviewing one student of the UCLA, and she first of all described the confrontation with the police as like a war scene, and then she said, all we have been doing was shining a light on the voices of Palestinians. I don't know what happened. And then she quotes more that this was a completely peaceful protest. And it's ridiculous that they were being deemed as a threat to civil society, when in reality they have been the ones who have been harassed over the last week. And oddly enough, I think there's some degree of sincere appallment from her side, especially if you think that violence is doing this and that's it. But in reality, I think the evil is not violence per se. Violence denotes some degree of gravity, of action, and of degree. But the principle as such is the issue of force. And only if you understand that force can be something broader than violence, then you are able to understand that this is wholly wrong. These kind of people have the same mentality that squatters have. Squatters come to your house, open it up without any violence, without any aggressive force. They come into it, they open your house, they stay in it, and yeah, they don't punch anyone. They don't. They don't even pull your door aside. They just come inside. They do whatever they want, and that's it. That's completely forceful and completely evil and completely wrong, but it's not violent. The same happened with the students. They are coming over the campuses. They are closing the streets. They're closing the. Sometimes they are taking the buildings. And yes, maybe they are not pushing people, punching people. In some cases they were, but let's say that they weren't in general. That still is completely improper and completely against a peaceful society, because you're interfering, first of all, with private property, but also with several other rights that people have. And you're using it by your presence. You're interfering by that, using your presence, and your whole body and your whole actions are against allowing people to do that. So I think one of the things we should reconsider is the whole concept of violence in these kind of issues, and start thinking about force as such.
I agree. I think there's a confusion about that. I think sometimes if you talk to people about the nature of government and you say that it's the monopoly on force, people get that. But if you ever use the other phrase which people use, which is the monopoly on violence, people seem to get a bit more confused about that. And when we're talking about these protests, people will say, look, they were peaceful up until the police came in. And now that doesn't even wash, really. But I think what they're trying to refer to is the fact that, look, these kids just set up an encampment. Yeah, they blocked the path for students getting in, but they weren't hitting them, so it wasn't violent. And I agree. I think it causes some confusion. Now, I think perhaps that's just the way people, they have a bit of a faulty conception of it. But yeah, I think that to some degree people trip up over this. And one of the ways that they try and defend themselves is they say, look, we have the right of freedom to assembly. And freedom of assembly I think is a proper right, but it's one of those ones that gets corrupted very often. I was looking at, I think it was Amnesty International, and how they consider freedom of assembly. And some definitions of freedom of assembly are better, but the way that Amnesty and a couple of other groups I saw were defining it was that you have the right to stage sit-ins. Now, if a sit-in means that you're going to someone else's property without their permission and you're going to squat in it, like you were saying, Alejandro, then you can't have the right to do that. I mean, that's just mixing in the freedom to do something and the right then to be violent against someone else. And people get themselves into an awful pickle, because a lot of the way people get suspicious of rights is they think, well, people have rights and they inherently clash and you have to weigh them up one against the other. And there's no way to adjudicate who supersedes the other. And I think that does come from including things which are actually violent, like staging a sit-in, or forceful, should we say, along with other legitimate things. I think that gets us into a lot of trouble. Marco and Richard?
And also violence against property as well, the destruction of property. I mean, you've seen, windows being broken, slogans being scrawled across campus buildings, on the floor, or on the buildings themselves. You've seen people occupying halls that they shouldn't occupy, in the squatting kind of fashion that Alejandro is referring to there. And that is also destruction. You're destroying someone else's rights as soon as you're attacking their property. You've got no right to destroy their property. I mean, that is just the road to anarchy. And of course, you've got various levels of violence here. You've also got the threat of violence a lot of the time, this hugely passive aggressive nature where people form a tight ring around a student in order to block their passage and intimidate them from being able to walk across a legitimate area that they're allowed to be in because it's public space or space that they've paid for, paid to attend that university and be allowed to cross in order to get to class. So all of that is evidence of the violence being there well ahead of the police having to come in and use their legitimate means to restore the order that should have been there in the first place, were their actions not taking place. I'd like to make a quick comparison, though, between how the UK deals with the kind of protests here. It's kind of different to Europe. I think the UK probably stands quite alone in this, but in all the protests that I can remember in the streets of London or any part of the UK, tear gas isn't used, rubber bullets certainly aren't used, water cannon isn't used. The only thing you would see in a more disorderly protest would be police on horseback, or that kind of thing, or moving in a line with shields in order to gradually force people to clear an area, that kind of thing. So when presented to a UK audience, the kind of footage that we've just seen there seems exceptionally chaotic and violent, and looks like an authoritarian government that you'd see in China or Iran or some or wherever. But of course that's not really relevant. And the softly approach that we've had in the UK has sometimes led to more destruction and more violence on the actual streets than is necessary, because everybody knows that the worst that's going to be held is they're going to be held in a group for a long time and they're going to need a pee. That's going to be, the extent of their trauma. So, but it is important that people recognise that. I think Europe's quite different. Europe's a bit more like America, and of course, we don't have armed police in the UK and that kind of stuff. So. But of course, all of this feeds across in the social media world. You're likely to see imitation protests. So it's important that they're stopped at a source, and it's not allowed to mutate into a bigger, wider problem.
Yeah, if you saw the feeds from this little terrorists in training, the little jihadis wearing the jihadi sheet on the heads, you would assume that this is the equivalent of Tiananmen Square, that the response of the government is such that the violence is just beyond any comprehension. Well, it is not. It's an appropriate response from the police, who are in charge of keeping the rule of law and making sure people do not break the law. Of course, the same people, when the police entered the campus, they were very challenging. They were chanting things like, "We are not afraid." Well, a few minutes after, they were on the floor begging for mommy and daddy to help them, or saying, "I'm a student here, leave me alone. I'm innocent. I'm a nice person." And it's quite laughable to see how quickly this arrogance, this group given self-confidence dissipates as soon as somebody is left alone facing the police. And as I said earlier on, all they have to do just not resist, but they choose not to comply. So that, frankly, they get what they deserve.
I think their own volition in all this is often just erased all of the time. It's as if they're always the recipient of oppression, they're the recipient of a police baton, and they have no agency whatsoever of their own for why they're there, why they're resisting, why they're not doing what's been asked of them. And that in itself is telling, together with the extent to which they cover their faces and conceal their identities, because frankly they know they're in the wrong.
And they're cowards. The reason why these Amnesty International entities do not specify that, you got the right to protest, but they don't specify not in somebody else's property. You have the right to protest in your own home, or on the land of somebody that gives you the permission to do it. These guys, their right to protest is just effectively a carte blanche to breach the rights of somebody else and cause violence and damage to other people. We've seen it over and over again how especially they targeted Jewish students.
Yeah, I think there does probably need to be quite a lot of work on redefining exactly what constitutes a right. I mean, it's not like I made a big study of this, but broadly, my impression, looking at the way people conceived what you have the right to do coming in through the 19th century, was much more, I think, along legitimate lines. And then when we get to the 20th century, we get kind of slipping in at the edges, things like the right to stage a sit-in as part of your right to assembly. And that just ends up introducing all this confusion into it. And we're going to have a look in just a second at the response that came from Joe Biden. And although there's something actually, I think, kind of good there, I think you do see mixed elements in there, which maybe we can draw out. But just before we do that, we have a couple of super chats. So Robert Naser, who's been a member for 24 months, says, the resolution is simple and clear, and our protesters need to be told this clearly, boldly, directly. Only unconditional surrender ends this. Yes, I think that's very true. And and the fact that they aren't going to unconditionally surrender, I think should tell people a lot. And then we have $5 from Enric Teller. Thank you very much. He says, the violence is taking away people's choices to realize their life choices. Theft. Yeah, I think so. So shall we go, Daniel, if we have that clip of Biden, should we just play that before we go and speak about it?
We have one more clip before that.
Oh, sure. Well, let's play that.
You can't support a people who are fighting back and fail to support those who are putting their lives on the line. So when they say all this garbage, all this slander about Hamas and about the Muslim Brotherhood and others that are out there fighting the fight, the PFLPs, armed wing, all these that are really out there in Gaza, right now as we speak, we have to do what the labor movement said. Which side are you on? We're on the side of the fighters. We're on the side of the fighters. Thank you very much. You're beautiful. We love you.
Yeah, and so this is at MIT. Unfortunately, Goodwill Hunting hasn't aged very well, I think, once he graduated. So, I mean, the groups that this guy's talking about, Hamas, I mean, I think everyone's familiar with Hamas, but the Muslim Brotherhood, just some of the worst actors in the world. If you want to, name a group that's brought immiseration to the Middle East and particularly to Egypt for decades, I mean, I think you could mention the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's just someone openly declaring, I'm in favor of violent theocratic killers, and he gets a cheer from the crowd. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do the crowd know who he's talking about? And unfortunately, I think for a lot of them, yeah, they do, and they're in favor of it. They're in favor of the fighters. There might be some ignorance, but I think sometimes when we want to say that these kids are ignorant, we're sort of hoping for too much. I think they do. They certainly know enough to know that they shouldn't be in favor of these people or in favor of what they're doing. But guys, what do you think about this geriatric making a speech at MIT?
Yeah, well, it's the contrast, isn't it, between the fact that you're saying, go the fighters and ceasefire now, and I'm for peace, and yet you're praising and claiming slander. I mean, slander against Hamas, slander against the Muslim Brotherhood. It doesn't stand up, does it? It doesn't stand up for a second. It's an absolute joke. And of course, people will cheer anything if it's shouted from a microphone at that sort of a protest. But I'm sure there are, as you say, Morgan, I'm sure there are people who understand fully what it means. And they're actually in favor of what Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, are doing, the anti-Semitism that fuels a lot of it, and the fact that they would like to see Israel wiped off the map.
This is what's really repellent about these few weeks of violence. And to see this kind of reject from 1968, the old people that didn't do anything when it was their turn, and they're trying to cause the same trouble that they didn't manage to cause themselves. And then you also see people like I can't remember his name, but a guy who actually killed a policeman in the 60s. Who's now in jail. His life sentence was death sentence was commuted to life sentence, and he still has the goal to address students and tell them to fight on and resist and all this kind of crap.
Talking about the former Black Panther there.
Yeah. These kind of people should be locked away so deep that they shouldn't be able to interfere with anyone else, or even try and spread the evil ideology. This kind of ideology, this kind of terrorism, which is being used to radicalize young minds in the West, is one of the most appalling things that we've seen in the last few years. We thought that 9/11 was the pits of the laws to the law, but Jesus, this is just so terrible. And they're just chanting about it. They're talking about it like it's something good. There's nothing good about Islamism. Nothing. Until people start fighting back and say, hang on a second, we're not going to have this kind of brainwashing for young people in the West. Well, we're not going to end up very well, are we?
Alejandro?
Just let me say that imagine that there's a person who is genuinely interested in Palestinians and doesn't agree with the statements of this person. Then this person should be vocal about it, should be vocal about the disagreement, and should not ally himself either in land or in timing, so that his message isn't confused with this guy. So far, we haven't heard anything about this. The movement looks more or less homogeneous. One of the things that we are going to discuss is one statement from a pamphlet of the Communist Party, and there's no person saying, okay, no, this is too much. This is something we disagree with. This is our statements. It's rather this whole trope of saying, oh, we're a big camp, we want a big and broader goal, and everyone is accepted here. But that in itself is opening up the doors to people who are extremely uncivilized, extremely bad, and they are the ones who are going to take the movement, because you're giving up to them, first of all, your credibility, and when you give up, and because they're too bad for you, they're the only ones who are going to take over the movement, and that's really bad.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Alejandro, and that they do seem so homogenous about this stuff. And the only kind of pushback I see coming from people on the left, it isn't even people who are pro-Palestinian, but who think that the broader movement is doing something wrong. It's someone I mentioned before, Brianna Wu, who is very much a person who believes in left-wing causes and all this kind of stuff, but she just happens to be pro-Israel and to understand that Hamas are evil. And for just vocalizing that Israel isn't a pariah state, and that even though she thinks there are things wrong with it, and for vocalizing that Hamas are terrible and that too many people are going around supporting them, you should see the way that she gets castigated by her own side, who are very radical people, and she, in a certain sense, is a very radical person on the left. So there just is no room for that kind of disagreement amongst these people. It's uniformity or nothing.
And in the London protests, you're seeing the signs, which, you can't hold up a sign which says Hamas is a terrorist organization near a Palestinian protest without being bundled away or attacked. So the fact that people can't criticize Hamas while supporting the Palestinian people, if that is their view, then it goes to show what a closed minds they've got and how they've managed to compartmentalize everything.
Indeed. So Daniel, shall we just move to the Biden clip that we've got?
All seen the images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles. Excuse me. The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments.
So this is just a clip from his broader speech, which I want to get your guys' sense of how good it was. I think I wouldn't put it past Joe Biden to have actually come out and said some quite bad things about these protests, and this is, I guess, better than what I would have expected from him. So, he was saying things about you have the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. I don't think the right to cause chaos is exactly precise, but he's getting at the right kind of thing. And he's getting at the fact that there's violence against students and anti-Semitism. So better than the bare minimum than maybe I would expect from Joe Biden. But what was your sense of this speech?
Yeah, it's a shame that he just stops at the speech and he doesn't actually translate the same principle when it comes to Israel. As I said earlier on, the violence expressed by these thugs in the university is equivalent in a different scale to the violence that Hamas has been unleashing to its people and towards Israel. And therefore, there's got to be a strong response from Israel against Hamas, in the same way there should be a strong response from the United States against these criminals that pretend to be protesters. So it would be nice if he could translate the foreign policy for the United States towards a stronger support to Israel, rather than caving in every time to whatever voice for appeasement, and effectively coming out of the side of Hamas.
And this is a speech Biden gave a mere hour or hour and a half ago, something like that, 2 hours max. And the fact that he's waited as long as he has before coming and making these statements is significant in itself, because they've waited to see the lie of the land, for, and to see how things pan out first of all. See, and then when it becomes necessary, then he'll make the point. But the principle needs to be stated first. If it's to hold weight, it should be stated first, not after the event, because then it looks like a form of pragmatism which you're falling to all the time. So I think it's the core message is good, but and of course this is one of the occasions where Biden's very closely reading his cards. He's not telling us about train journeys or his granddad or what ice cream flavor he likes. He's sticking to the message here. So that at least gives it extra credibility when sometimes he can obviously undermine the message.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it goes to your point, Marco, about the implications that it should have for him for foreign policy and support for Israel, is that when he's walking off the stage, I think one of the journalists asks him, "Are you changing your stance on Israel?" And he says no. And either the implications go over his head, or he recognizes them and he just needs to evade them and push them down. Alejandro, what was your take on this?
Well, first of all, I think I agree with Richard, and I think maybe politically it is selling that he is making and giving this message, because I think this, contrary to what he says later on the speech, I do think that this is a political statement, and I think that this is telling that, or it's his perception that American people, and specifically people who can be his voters, don't want people like the students taking over the universities. And I think it's a good signal, at least if he's capturing well the sentiment from the people, that Americans have said enough is enough. Now, I do disagree with him in a way that he puts it. I don't think that there is, on the one hand, the rule of law, and on the other hand, you have the right to free speech. I don't think that they are in conflict. I think that there's the right to free speech, and part of the right to free speech is that you have a rights respecting government, and therefore, not only they are in conflict, they are dependent on each other. And you can only have the vision that they are in conflict when you think that free speech entails something that it doesn't entail, and that is taking over property, closing transit, or imposing yourself on others, and that, in my view, isn't free speech.
We also have 2 super chats. We have $3 from Jonathan Honig. Thank you, Jonathan. And then $5 from Lorisetto, I think that's how you say it, who said, "These protests are willful negligence that may lead to scenarios reminiscent of Lord of the Flies." I mean, I think certainly looking at the looking at the students when they're being violent or aggressive towards the Jewish students, or looking at them having to be broken up. It is very much a kind of, anarchy kind of situation like Lord of the Flies. So very much, I think that's what they're in favor of. And then I think it comes off a bit rich when they complain about them being broken up and say we're all just being a bit peaceful. The whole encampment, the whole effort is very Lords of the Flies like. So I think there's something just off there. Daniel says we've got another clip of Biden, so we'll just have a look at the second part of his speech as well.
In America, there should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong. There's no place for racism in America. It's all wrong. It's un-American. I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that. But it doesn't mean anything goes. It needs to be done without violence, without destruction, without hate, and within the law. Make no mistake, as president, I will always defend free speech, and I will always be just as strong in standing up for the rule of law. That's my responsibility to you, the American people, and my obligation to the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Yeah, I think you see very much that dichotomy that he sets up that you mentioned, Alejandro, between free speech and the rule of law. I think, again, it's good that he's coming out against the use of violence and that we can't allow that to go on. I don't know if you guys find this. I find when people use the phrase, there's no place for X, I find it just too vague for what it entails. Because when he's talking about there's no place for anti-Semitism, does he mean just I condemn it morally, or there's no place for racism? Am I condemning it morally, or am I saying that it'll be illegal? And I think often what people are mixing in is, I think somewhere in his speech, he mentions there being the idea of hate speech, which is how he condemns the anti-Semitism. And I think we get into kind of very muddy waters when we start talking like that. But what did you guys make of it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the passive tense there, the fact that you take out a perpetrator from the context and erase them from existence, and then you don't have to criticize them. And of course, the ludicrous balance that's always thrown in when Islamophobia is then added to the mix. I think his point about anything goes can also seem a bit hypocritical in the wake of the 2020 riots and response to BLM and the George Floyd incident. All of that, at the time, the Democrats were quite keen to foster an anything goes attitude. And of course, we know where that leads. That leads to things like, the Portland city anarchy, and which is a good reflection of we've been coming towards on these campuses. So obviously nobody actually wants to see the consequences of that, but it's certainly exploited for political purpose from time to time. And of course, each occasion when you do that means that when you're then facing the same situation, you're weaker for it. So, consistency in principles is crucial.
I think this part of the speech was the nakedly political one. Here, he effectively betrays his own desire not to support Israel, to stand on the side of Hamas, by refusing to name who's the guilty party here and making equivalence between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And then he talks about Arab American and Palestinian American in the same phrase as he says, we don't want to be racist. Well, hang on a second. You're just being racist by using this Palestinian American, which, first of all, Palestinian is not a state or a nationality in the first place. So what reason have you got to attach it to America in the first place? But the worst thing is this equating, there's some anti-Semitism that we've seen in the last few days, but there's also Islamophobia, totally ignoring the fact that most of the violence comes from people who support Islamism, people who support, have you seen in the clip before, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and all this kind of the worst of worst that humanity has ever created. And we're still at the level of the president of the United States, the president, the leader of the free world. We're having this kind of talk and speech. It's just, frankly, it's just sinister, and it's just repellent.
Alejandro?
Just let me make a brief point. In my view, I think the president shouldn't have views as such he shouldn't be so explicit about which ideas the country should have. I certainly dislike and find abhorrent the whole idea of anti-Semitism myself, but I don't think that the president has the role of telling the nation which ideas they should uphold. And here as well, as Mark and Richard have said, this is very wishy-washy. He's saying, yeah, Shangri-La, everything, we are very fine. This is, yeah, it isn't, he isn't saying something, or he isn't doing something that isn't extremely against the precedent that other presidents have done. But in my view, I think the president should say, hey, these people were violating other people's rights. The police intervened. I support them. They did great. Thank you very much. Let's move over. And he's doing that. And yes, he isn't creating a precedent. The precedent has been done before, but still, I disagree with it, and I don't like that.
Okay, and then just for the final bit of the show, we're going to have just a brief look at one of the pamphlets that's been handed out at, I think it was at UCLA was where this pamphlet was handed out, and it's from like the Communist Society or something like that. And so the pamphlet's called Organize the Intifada, a communist program for escalating the Gaza solidarity movement. And we just got some pictures of it here for you. I hope you guys are able to see it, at least on some of the other pages. The typeface is fairly small. But this is basically, I guess you'd say, principles that they want to adhere to by which they can advance the cause a bit further. And one of the things that they call for, which I know that you had some thoughts about, Alejandro, was boycotting. I don't know if you had any thoughts for people just about some of the content here.
Yes, I mean, when you look at the booklet more closely, first of all, I would tell you, if you agree with something or disagree with something, I certainly agree that a boycott is a good way to go. I agree with the form. I disagree with the matter in this case. So I'm not calling to boycott Israel as they are intending to do. However, what this party is telling you or telling us is that what they have to do and what they are arguing for is to essentially nationalize the schools, include labor into the encampments of these movements, and they are also arguing to globalizing Intifada, which is certainly not to boycott. And I think it's completely improper and something that shouldn't be included in a proper boycotting movement. Yes, you could say that this isn't, they aren't speaking for the whole movement, the whole notion of what is being said behind and what the majority of the protesters are saying. However, these people are immersed in that. And as I said before, why don't they repudiate them and say that they aren't with them?
So we've got some of the text coming up here. It is fairly small, but it's very standard kind of lefty stuff. It's talking before about linking it with the struggle, with the labor struggle and all this kind of stuff. Mark or Richard, what did you make of it?
Yeah, this is not just lefty. This is communist, openly revolutionary communists of America, they call themselves. I mean, Jesus Christ, in 2024, haven't you got enough instances in history where communism has brought around millions of death and misery and famine and all sort of pain and suffering for millions and billions of people? I mean, Pol Pot committed a massive genocide for his population in the 70s, He was a communist. Mao, the great Chairman Mao, great Chinese leader, whatever, he murdered millions, tens of millions of people. Stalin, he murdered his own people by the millions again, tens of millions. I mean, at what point these rotten, evil ideas are going to disappear down the drains of history? What's wrong with these people? Not only communism is bad enough, but let's do an intifada. Intifada is open war to civilization. It's pure, unadulterated terrorism. We're talking about children during the previous intifadas, children with suicide bombs and vests, martyr themselves in the name of Allah or whatever God in the sky they've got. I mean, guys, 2024, wake up. You cannot talk about the stuff and still pretend you're nice people. You're just totally, utterly evil because, first of all, you refuse to see what you're doing. You refuse to look at the word intifada and realize what it is. And second, you refuse to look at history. You refuse to look at the evidence, the facts. You don't have to take my word. Just look at the facts. You are just a bunch of evil bastards.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say that better myself. I mean, you only got to look at what some of the things include here, and the opportunism side of it as well. The fact they talk about the ceaseless oppression of capitalism, for example, which is obviously their core concern anyway, and anything else is just added to it like a bit of spice in the soup. But the soup is still the same old broth underneath. And of course, they're talking about the global working class overturning the brutal system. All of that is just standard communist talk. And the attempt to pull together a struggle that instead of taking, that divides people up in the way that the modern culture tends to, groups them by races, by oppression, by different classes, sees them entirely in groups, and then attempts to use that instead of the class system to get an uprising and a revolutionary overtake of capitalism and the USA, presumably. It's astonishing this still has any traction whatsoever. The extent to which it represents students is hard to tell. A lot of this, you can tie it up with the myth of the 68 and whether it's directly linked to people who were there at the time or bought into the myth subsequently of what some of those revolutionaries at the time were claiming for, and are just repeating it in a second-handed manner. All of that's in there, I'm sure, as is a lack of understanding and yeah, it's just an element of this, but it's a significant element to shine a light on.
Yeah, I agree that the whole communist rhetoric just feels like a throwback and something completely just anachronistic at this point. I think also people should be much more upset than they are about the way that these groups use the term intifada. And there was a debate, I think it was between Piers Morgan and Mehdi Hasan the other day, which expanded out onto Twitter about whether the term intifada is legitimate or not, or whether it carries anti-Semitic connotations. And, the relevance here being that they're calling for the globalization of the intifada, organize the intifada. And people, it's something that you can really notice is people get really kind of I don't know, almost hyper specific about details. So like Mehdi Hasan was saying, oh, look, there was a song that was used in Cairo or something during the Arab Spring that was talking about the Intifada. So Intifada is something that just generally means resistance or uprising in the Arab world. It doesn't have any anti-Semitic connotations. And yet when the people, I think, are using the term Intifada here, they're very conscious of what the first and the second Intifada was or were, which was mass violence against Jews and Israelis, suicide bombings, people in Israel not being able to feel safe, being scared that they were going to be killed. And so when they're talking about globalize the Intifada, not only are they just saying, look, globalize the cause for Palestinian statehood or something like that. I mean, tied in with that, what they mean is mass violence against Jews. And it's no accident that it's the Jewish students on these campuses who get violence done against them, either just blocking them from going to class or getting openly assaulted. We played a video yesterday, I think, of a girl who tried to taser a guy. None of this is accidental, and neither is their use of the term intifada. And it should be anyone who uses the term intifada unironically, I think, should just be discounted in people's minds. Any other thoughts, guys, about this booklet or anything else?
Well, I mean, we've seen over and over during the last few months how our terms have been watered down and switched in meanings just to hide how anti-Semitic the people who do that are. Look at genocide. Look at even the word jihad. People are pretending that it doesn't mean Islamic jihad, i.e., murder all the Jews before you turn your attention to the Western world. Anti-Zionism, or it's not anti-Semitism. We just don't want the state of Israel, meaning that you don't want any Israeli living in Israel, i.e., you want them dead. Anti-Semitism, it doesn't mean you're killing Jews. Oh, really? What planet did you just land from? All this kind of words that they're trying to gaslighting us, making us think that the meaning of a word is not what we think it is. Well, it's perfectly well, we know perfectly well what they're on about. They're about anti-Semitism and try and disguise it under very thin veneer of decency what they actually want from life. And every time you see these people pretending to be on the side of peace, well, just look for the amount of card that they haven't got in support of the return of hostages, which are still there 209 days after, are still held by the people in Gaza. The lovely people of Gaza who need so much help from us are holding hostages which were captured in Israel on October the 7th. So, this pretense of being on the side of peace is just a lie. Just a lie.
And I'll just add one final little bit, which is just the levels of pretense that go on here, whether it's in the language as spoken about there, or whether it's in even the BDS movement, for example. The idea that these students, even in these encampments, aren't using Google or Amazon, some of the companies that they would claim they want to divest from, it's just nonsense. They wouldn't even be following their own criteria because it just doesn't stand up. So it's so much pretense. It's about getting the illusion of rebellion, revolutionary status, like in the way that you'd wear a Che Guevara t-shirt if you're 18 and think you're a revolutionary. So it's got a passing fad to it that every student group goes through pretty much, and this is just this generation within this culture.
Any final thoughts, Alejandro?
Yes, just the video is titled "The Right Way to Deal with Pro-Palestinian Protesters." And just to conclude it, I think we should say that the right way to deal with them in the way that they, because of the way that they acted, was to do what the police ended up doing. In my view, they did it too late, and they weren't, at least the leaders of the universities weren't vocal enough to oppose these movements. At the same time, if there's a new pro-Palestinian movement that wants to be really peaceful and that wants to deal and in debate, that has proper arguments for those, I will oppose them with words, with arguments, because they're wrong and they have nothing else to say. And that's in essence why they are resorting to violence. I think I hope that in the future these kind of movements are muted, that this kind of violence is going down, and hopefully this is a call for people. Yeah, and if Biden is really pandering to the larger mass of voters, this is hopefully a sign that people are fed up, and hopefully there won't be any more violence like this for other moments.
Yes, I concur with everything you guys said, and I think we should just underscore for people that even if these protesters weren't anti-Semitic, the root problems go deeper than that. Although certainly what's really disgusting about them is the anti-Semitism that's there. The nature of these kind of protests is to be violent or is to use force, as we were saying before, and it's just something that can't be tolerated. And unfortunately, we've kind of developed a culture where protests are almost like the first resort that people go on. And really, I think if you really feel like there's something wrong with a state, protests are very much almost like a last degree kind of thing. So the protests in Iran, for example, once your state is so authoritarian and corrupt like that, then yeah, it's perfectly right to go on a protest. Or if we're talking about a Hong Kong against China. But in free Western nations, protests shouldn't be something that's in the arsenal unless there's something really awful. And you know, I know they're going to argue that Western states are just that awful, but then these people are just deluded. So we need to try and uproot the idea that protests are just normal or something that's legitimate for people to go and do as almost like participating in the democratic process. But okay, guys, we'll wrap up. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Alejandro, where can people come follow you, find your work?
One of the things that I've been doing with my participation in the TRS has been promoting the Ayn Rand essays that James Valent and I did a couple of years ago. You can find it as a playlist here. If you're interested in the philosophy of that inspired Ayn Rand Center UK, I think the essays of Ayn Rand are essentially gold. And we essentially did these videos to help you digest them. And if you want to go further with them, I will be very glad if you do.
Yeah, and incredibly good. Nearly as good as the videos you can find on the Briefly Objective, the sister channel of ARCUK, where you can find very short videos that tackle some of the issue we've been talking about in a more condensed way, so you can share them, watch them yourself, or just, as I said, put it on your feed on social media in order to help try and regain a bit more of sanity in this crazy world.
For sure. And you can find me at Twitter and Substack, linked in the description. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.